Mark Twain Selected Works. Autobiographical Dictation of March 29, 1906. Wanderjahre. I had not joined the Muscatine migration. Just before that happened, which I think was in 1853, I disappeared one night and fled to St. Louis. There I worked in the composing room of the Evening News for a time, and then started on my travels to see the world. The world was New York City, and there was a little World's Fair there. It had just been opened where the great reservoir afterward was, and where the sumptuous public library is now being built, 5th Avenue and 42nd Street. I arrived in New York with $2 or $3 in pocket change and a $10 bank bill concealed in the lining of my coat. I got work at villainous wages in the establishment of John A. Gray and Green in Cliff Street, and I found board in a sufficiently villainous mechanics boarding house in Duane Street. A firm paid my wages in wildcat money at its face value, and my week's wage merely sufficed to pay board and lodging. By and by, I went to Philadelphia and worked there some months as a sub on the Inquirer and the Public Ledger. Finally, I made a flying trip to Washington to see the sights there, and in 1854 I went back to the Mississippi Valley, sitting upright in the smoking car 2 or 3 days and nights. When I reached St. Louis, I was exhausted. I went to bed on board a steamboat that was bound for Muscatine. I fell asleep at once, with my clothes on, and didn't wake again for 36 hours. I worked in that little job office in Keokuk as much as 2 years, I should say, without ever collecting a cent of wages, for Orion was never able to pay anything. But Dick and I had good times. I don't know what Dick got, but it was probably only uncashable promises. One day in the midwinter 1856 or 1857, I think it was 1856, I was coming along the main street of Keokuk in the middle of the forenoon. It was bitter weather, so bitter that street was deserted almost. A light, dry snow was blowing here and there on the ground and on the pavement, swirling this way and that way and making all sorts of beautiful figures, but very chilly to look at. The wind blew a piece of paper past me, and it lodged against the wall of a house. Something about the look of it attracted my attention, and I gathered it in. It was a $50 bill, the only one I had ever seen, and the largest assemblage of money I had ever encountered in one spot. I advertised it in the papers and suffered more than $1,000 worth of solicitude and fear and distress during the next few days, lest the owner should see the advertisement and come and take my fortune away. As many as 4 days went by without an applicant. Then I could endure this kind of misery no longer. I felt sure that another 4 could not go by in this safe and secure way. I felt that I must take that money out of danger. So I bought a ticket for Cincinnati and went to that city. I worked there several months in the printing office of Wrightson and Company. I had been reading Lieutenant Herndon's account of his explorations of the Amazon, and had been mightily attracted by what he said of Coca. I made up my mind that I would go to the headwaters of the Amazon and collect Coca, and trade in it, and make a fortune. I left for New Orleans in the steamer Paul Jones with this great idea filling my mind. One of the pilots of that boat was Horace Bixby. Little by little, I got acquainted with him, and pretty soon I was doing a lot of steering for him in his daylight watches. When I got to New Orleans, I inquired about ships leaving for Paris and discovered that there weren't any, and learned that there probably wouldn't be any during that century. It had not occurred to me to inquire about these particulars before leaving Cincinnati, so there I was. I couldn't get to the Amazon. I had no friends in New Orleans and no money to speak of. I went to Horace Bixby and asked him to make a pilot out of me. He said he would do it. $400, cash, in advance. So I steered for him up to St. Louis, borrowed the money from my brother-in-law, and closed the bargain. I had acquired this brother-in-law several years before. This was Mr. William A. Moffett, a merchant of Virginia, a fine man in every way. He had married my sister Pamela, and the Samuel E. Moffett of whom I have been speaking was their son. Within 18 months I became a competent pilot, and I served that office until the Mississippi River traffic was brought to a standstill by the breaking out of the Civil War.